Hyperkalemia, Part 2, Treatment. In Part 1 of this lecture series, we gave some background information about potassium and talked about causes and signs and symptoms of hyperkalemia. In Part 2, we'll focus on the treatment of hyperkalemia. Acute hyperkalemia is a clinical emergency, and rapid, urgent treatment is essential. Hyperkalemia should be treated emergently if the potassium level is greater than 6.5 MEQs per liter, or EKG manifestations are present regardless of the potassium. The goals of acute therapy for hyperkalemia are threefold. 1. Use agents that antagonize the cardiac effects of hyperkalemia. Antagonize the effect of potassium on excitable cell membranes by stabilizing the cardiac membrane. 2. Use agents that shift potassium from the extracellular into the intracellular space. Redistribute extracellular potassium into the cells by promoting cellular uptake. And 3. Use agents that enhance potassium elimination. Enhance elimination of potassium from the body by removing potassium slowly. Let's go over a case of a patient presenting with hyperkalemia. JW is a 72-year-old man with end-stage renal disease brought to the emergency department by his family for weakness, fatigue, and diarrhea. He missed his last hemodialysis treatment. His initial ECG shows narrow, tall peak T waves. The physician suspects hyperkalemia. Considering JW's severe ECG changes, the physician orders a stat BMP and then administers calcium chloride 1 gram IV push times 1 dose. The first step is to antagonize potassium's cardiac toxicity. Intravenous calcium is administered to calm and stabilize the irritable myocardium. Calcium directly antagonizes the myocardial cell membrane excitability induced by hyperkalemia and rapidly normalizes it. It does so by restoring the electrical gradient. Calcium does not decrease serum potassium levels. Calcium for injection is available either as the gluconate or chloride salt, both 10% by weight. Because of the molecular weight of each respective salt, more than 10 mL of calcium gluconate will be often required. Calcium gluconate contains only 1/3 the calcium contained in calcium chloride. Here's a breakdown of how much calcium, elemental calcium, is contained in 1 gram of each of calcium chloride and calcium gluconate. You can see more elemental calcium is contained in 1 gram of calcium chloride compared to calcium gluconate. Calcium gluconate. The dose is calcium gluconate 10% injection administered at a dose of 10 to 20 mL IV over 1 to 3 minutes. Calcium gluconate is preferred over calcium chloride because it causes less tissue necrosis. It's used in pediatric cases and in patients with less emergent hyperkalemia. Calcium chloride. Calcium chloride is most often administered during emergency cases of hyperkalemia, most often during cardiac arrest. The calcium in calcium chloride is ionized, so it is released immediately. Calcium chloride has a high risk of tissue necrosis if it extravasates, so it preferably should be administered through a central venous line. The dose of calcium chloride 10% is 10 mL equal to 1 gram IV push. For either calcium chloride or calcium gluconate, the onset of calcium action is very rapid, within 1 to 3 minutes after the dose is given. The duration of action is approximately 30 to 60 minutes. The dose can be repeated in 5 minutes if ECG changes do not resolve and as needed afterward for recurrence. Let's continue on with the case. After calcium administration, the T waves on JW's ECG begin to normalize. Results of the BMP are as follows. Sodium 135, potassium 6.8, chloride 114, CO2 20, BUN 110, serum creatinine 5.3, and calcium 8.5. The physician orders regular insulin 10 units IV push times 1 dose, followed by dextrose 50%, 50 ml times 1 dose. He asked the respiratory therapist to administer albuterol by nebulizer at a dose of 10 milligrams over 10 minutes. The RN to then follow the albuterol with 1 amp of sodium bicarb, 50 MEQs IV push times 1 dose. The next step in the treatment of hyperkalemia is to shift the potassium from the plasma into the cells. There are 3 modalities that are available to do this. 1, insulin and glucose, 2, beta-2 agonists, and 3, sodium bicarbonate. Insulin and glucose. Insulin lowers the potassium concentration by promoting its entry into cells. Insulin rapidly shifts potassium into the cell in a dose-dependent fashion. It shifts potassium into cells by activation of the sodium-potassium ATPase pump. The dose of insulin and glucose is a bolus of regular insulin, 10 units intravenously times 1 dose. Dextrose 50%, 50 ml IV times 1 dose is also administered to prevent hypoglycemia. The reduction in potassium is apparent 15 to 30 minutes and lasts for 4 to 6 hours. Albuterol nebulized. Selective beta-2 receptor agonists, such as nebulized albuterol, produce a shift of potassium into cells and can be useful to treat acute hyperkalemia. The shift of potassium into cells is caused by albuterol's beta-2 adrenergic receptor stimulation activating adenylate cyclase and causing an increase in sodium-potassium ATPase pump activity. The shift of potassium into the cells is additive to the effect of insulin and has no effect on total body potassium. The dose of nebulized albuterol is 10 to 20 milligrams dissolved in 4 ml of saline. This is administered by nebulizer over 10 minutes. Use the concentrated form of inhalation solution at a concentration of 5 milligrams per ml. Note that the effective dose is at least 4 times higher than that typically used for bronchodilation. Depending on the dose, albuterol can lower the plasma potassium concentration by 0.6 to 1 MEQs per liter within 30 to 60 minutes. Even with the use of a metered dose inhaler, a smaller decline in potassium of about 0.4 MEQs per liter after 60 minutes is observed. Unfortunately, even among patients not taking beta blockers, as many as 40% seem to be resistant to the hypokalemic effect of albuterol. Sodium bicarbonate. Sodium bicarbonate has long been recommended for the acute treatment of hyperkalemia, although recently its efficacy in this setting has been questioned. Sodium bicarbonate treats hyperkalemia by creating a temporary alkalemia that moves intracellular hydrogen ions into the serum extracellularly while shifting potassium intracellularly. With the administration of sodium bicarbonate, the serum becomes alkaline. Acidic hydrogen ions then migrate out of the cell to neutralize the alkaline bicarbonate. When hydrogen ions leave the cell, potassium ions then enter the cell in order to maintain electrical neutrality. This then helps in the treatment of hyperkalemia. Sodium bicarbonate is most beneficial in hyperkalemic patients with severe metabolic acidosis, pH less than 7.2, and likely has no benefit when used for hyperkalemia in non-acidotic patients. The dose is sodium bicarbonate, 50 MEQs IV infused slowly over 5 minutes and repeated in 30 minutes when necessary. The hypokalemic effect is variable and may be delayed up to 4 hours. JW's ECG begins to normalize to sinus rhythm. The physician orders Kayexalate 50 grams as a retention enema. The third step in the treatment of hyperkalemia is to use agents that enhance potassium elimination from the body. There are three modalities that are available: cation exchange resins, diuretics, and hemodialysis. Sodium polystyrene sulfonate, also known as SPS or K-exolate. Sodium polystyrene sulfonate is a non-absorbed cation exchange resin that works primarily in the colon by binding the potassium in the bowel in exchange for sodium and eliminating the potassium in the stools. Cation exchange resins have a slow effect, so therefore SPS does not have a role in the emergency treatment of hyperkalemia. When given orally, the onset of action is at least 2 hours, and the maximum effect may not be seen for 4 to 6 hours. Dosage. The oral dose for non-emergent removal of body potassium is 15 to 60 grams of SPS with sorbitol suspension. The enema dose of SPS is as follows. The effect of SPS as a retention enema is more rapid but of lesser magnitude. A dose of 50 grams of SPS can be given as an enema, retained for at least 30 to 60 minutes at 4 hours to 6 hour intervals. Sorbitol 70% is an osmotic laxative that is often combined with SPS to facilitate the transport of the resin through the GI tract and to decrease constipation. A concern with SPS is its possible toxicity. SPS should be used cautiously, as it may alone or in sorbitol can cause potentially fatal bowel necrosis. The FDA does not recommend mixing SPS with sorbitol 70%. It is unclear if intestinal injury is caused by the SPS or sorbitol. It should not be used in patients with impaired bowel function, such as constipation, ischemic colitis, intestinal vascular atherosclerosis, and inflammatory bowel disease. There are some other newer cation exchange resins on the market. Patiromer or Veltessa is a non-absorbed polymer that binds potassium in exchange for calcium. It binds potassium throughout the GI tract, but predominantly in the distal colon, where the concentration of free potassium is the highest. Another cation exchange resin is called sodium zirconium cyclosilicate, or ZS9. It's a non-absorbed microporous compound cation exchanger that binds potassium in exchange for sodium and hydrogen ion throughout the gastrointestinal tract. Other treatments to remove potassium out of the body include diuretics. Excretion of renal potassium can be increased with the use of diuretics, particularly loop diuretics, for example furosemide. Also, hemodialysis or continuous renal replacement therapy are the treatments of last resort, with the exception of patients already receiving these therapies. In summary, we previously outlined the 3 key goals of treating hyperkalemia. We stated 4 key differences between calcium gluconate and calcium chloride. We explained how insulin glucose and inhaled albuterol work to decrease potassium in hyperkalemia and reviewed their dosages. We specified when sodium bicarbonate should be used to treat hyperkalemia, and we described the use of sodium polystyrene sulfonate, including mechanism, route, dose, efficacy, and toxicities. We've got a lot in store at the Pharm Easy Tutor channel. There will be upcoming talks on anticoagulation featuring warfarin, heparin, and the DOACs, electrolyte management, quinolone side effects, all about hospital pharmacy, and much, much more. So please stay tuned to us. Thanks for tuning in to watch this installment of the Pharm Easy Tutor. I hope you learned something that you could use at school or in practice. If you'd like to continue to see more of these types of tutorials on YouTube, please make sure to click on the subscribe button below to change it from red to gray. Also, if you like this video, I would appreciate it if you can click on the thumbs up icon below to change the color to blue. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to add them in the comments section below, or share this site with someone else. Stay tuned to the Farm Easy Tutor channel for more lectures in the upcoming weeks. So until next time, remember to take it easy.